Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today and for braving what seems to be the return of winter here in Washington. My name is Michael Kugelman. I'm the South Asia and Southeast Asia Associate for the Wilson Center's Asia program. All of us know the name Aung San Suu Kyi. She's one of the world's most iconic democracy leaders. She spent 15 of 20 years under house arrest until she was released in late 2010 for good. And as you know, she's now running for a parliamentary seat in Burma's elections, which are happening this coming Sunday. And barring anything profoundly unforeseen, she's expected to triumph. She's had quite a remarkable life. Back in the 80s, she was essentially a relatively modest figure, known mostly for being the daughter of Aung San, Burma's independence hero. Yet beginning in the late 80s, things started to change. Ever since then, she's risen to become one of the world's essentially most famous people, and of course a Nobel Peace Prize winner. So in this context, we're very fortunate to welcome Peter Popham here today. He's just published a new biography on Aung San Suu Kyi. It's called The Lady in the Peacock. It is based on his own reportage in Burma, much of it undercover, as I understand it. It's based on some meetings he's had with Aung San Suu Kyi. I think you interviewed her several times, 2002, 2011, is that? And it's also based on previously unpublished diary writings by one of her chief confidants. It's a very interesting read, and it has some very revealing new material, so I recommend that you pick up a copy right outside being sold. I think Mother's Day is just 6 weeks away or so it can make a good gift. In terms of Peter's bio, you have it in front of you, so I'll be brief. He's a journalist with The Independent. He's reported from a variety of places, Albania, Mongolia, South Asia, and he's got the misfortune of reporting most recently from Italy. That was a joke, of course. He's also the author of a previous book, Tokyo, the City at the End of the World, and he currently works from both Italy and the UK. Peter?
Thank you very much for the generous and kind introduction, Michael, and I'm very pleased to be here in Washington. It's pure good luck rather than anything planned, but there has never been a more interesting moment to be thinking about and talking about Burma and about Aung San Suu Kyi in particular. In just a few days, on the 1st of April, there is a series of by-elections in Burma, 48 by-elections, to replace MPs who have been elevated to the cabinet. And Aung San Suu Kyi is standing along with members of her party for those vacant seats. And as most of you will have noticed, I'm sure, there have been a series of huge rallies across the country in which Suu Kyi has been greeted by tens of thousands of often very excited Burmese people in scenes which are uncannily reminiscent of what happened in late 1988 and the first half of 1989. For a long time, as Michael said, Sue was incommunicado. She was locked in her home for more than 15 years. The last period, which ended in November 2010, she was locked up for 7.5 years with almost no contact with the outside world. And it made it quite easy for many people to really write her off as somebody who was a political ingenue, whose time had come and gone, and whose life was, if anything, rather tragic. And yet it's clear now that she is extremely central to whatever happens in Burma next. And what I'd like to talk about this morning is exactly why she is still so central. The reason she became important, we know, because of who her father was. Her father was Aung San, who was the founder of the Burmese army, the architect of independent Burma, the man who flew to London to negotiate the independence of Burma with Attlee, the socialist prime minister of Great Britain in 1947. Um, Shortly after that, and before Burma could become independent, Aung San was assassinated, as a result of which he became a sort of mythical figure in the pantheon of the country. He became the single person who tragically symbolized Burma's independent identity. And this meant that for Aung San Suu Kyi, she had a particular birthright, a particular and unique position in the nation's esteem. And it was thanks to that name and thanks to the inheritance of her father that when she entered politics, her impact was immediate. You probably know the story, but I'll give you the outlines again. In late March 1988, Aung San Suu Kyi's mother fell terribly ill. She had a very severe stroke, and she was taken to hospital in Rangoon. And Aung San Suu Kyi knew well enough about the conditions of hospitals in Burma to know that she could not leave her in the care of the hospital, because while the hospital existed, there was no care in effect. You needed to have close relatives there to provide everything, to provide medicine, to provide food, to provide nursing, and to pay for any other services which the doctors might provide. So it was immediately after she got a phone call in Oxford telling her that her mother had had a stroke, she flew to Rangoon to be with her mother. And she was basically there for that reason alone. There was absolutely no political dimension to her visit to Burma, and she stayed in the same hospital room as Daw Kin Ji for the best part of 3 months, sharing the room and looking after her. At the same time, however, largely because of the appalling policies pursued by General Ne Win, the dictator of Burma, there was a popular uprising in progress outside on the streets of the city. In July 1988, doctors told Suu Kyi that her mother had no hope of recovery and there was no reason for her to remain in hospital. So Suu Kyi reorganized the family home on the great lake in the middle of Rangoon and took her mother home and basically turned it into a sick bay where she could look after her mother in the comfortable surroundings of home. And gradually there, after her return home, Sue became the object of attention by the new rising and hopeful democratic forces in the country. They saw her basically as a possible figurehead for the movement, which had no clear leadership at the time. But to have the name and the very familiar face of Aung San's daughter at the head of the movement would give it an enormous amount of prestige, which at the moment it lacked. She resisted these advances for a long time. She was there in Rangoon in the summer with her husband Michael Aris, the British scholar, and with their 2 sons, Alex and Kim. And it was quite clear to Aung San Suu Kyi, as it was to Michael, that for her to take up a political role in Burma would be extremely disruptive of their family life. So she hesitated for a long time. Then finally, on the 26th of August 1988, she made her first speech at Shwedagon Pagoda, the most important pagoda in Burma, where, according to one journalist who was watching, called Win Tin, who is still today one of the leaders of her party, there were 1 million people watching. Now, we don't know if it's true, but it certainly seems a lot. But it's not inconceivable that there was something approaching that number. It was a vast gathering. But when she came out to speak, and everyone knew her name, but nobody knew anything else about her, as a woman called Nita Yin Yin May, who was at the time the information officer at the British Embassy, told me, she was an unknown. She was just another general's daughter. But in the course of her speech, in which she declared very forcefully her feelings that the army, and Ne Win in particular, had led the country astray, she became, as Nita put it, the one we were looking for. This was our true leader. In the months after that first meeting, she started campaigning. Her party was founded, and she started travelling the country making speeches. And everywhere she went, she was met by vast crowds, just as she'd been met by vast crowds in the last few weeks. And she attracted a sort of adoring following, almost overnight. And one reason was because of the way she spoke to people. She'd been living outside Burma for decades, and she'd become un-Burmese in certain ways. She wasn't formal in the way she addressed people. She used humour, she used directness in the way she spoke. And her appeal to people was very strong. She was coming to open a new NLD office in a suburb on the outskirts of Rangoon, said Bertil Lintner, a Swedish journalist who is one of the great experts on Burma, and who was there to witness this particular meeting. It was scorching hot, April, before the rains. I went out there in a taxi, and thousands of people were waiting in this scorching sun for hours. Children, old women, people of all ages. Suddenly, you could see a white car somewhere in the distance, trailing a cloud of dust behind it. Then the car arrived, and the cheers were incredible. And she got out, very relaxed, surrounded by her students, her bodyguards, and smiled at everybody and was garlanded. And she went up on stage and started talking. And she talked for 2 or 3 hours, and nobody left, not even the children. My Burmese is fairly rudimentary, but I could understand what she was talking about. She was using very simple, down-to-earth words. "You've got a head," she said, "and you haven't got a head to nod with. You've been nodding for 26 years. The head is there for you to think." That kind of thing. And people were laughing. It was a family affair. Despite her total lack of experience of politics, and despite being away from Burma since the age of 14, Sue was quickly acclaimed the leader of the democracy movement. Everywhere she went, people were bowled over by her name, her beauty, and the strength within her apparent frailty. As one old lady put it in the far north, in the Kachin district, "This ruler of our kingdom, a pretty thing, a pretty little thing." One can say with hindsight that it was all a bit too easy. Her tours were not like election campaign tours, but they were like royal progressions. A century after the British had sent Burma's last king into exile, the monarchy was back. That was the feeling. Sue rode those emotions all the way to the general election of 1990, which of course her party won with a landslide victory, which the military regime then simply ignored. But along the way she made mistakes, inevitably, given her lack of experience. One problem was her party, which really had no sort of ideological coherence or glue. It was held together by her name, and it consisted of academics and journalists, many of them on the left, old soldiers who were former comrades of General Ne Win, who had fallen out with him and had been sacked, and who were now dissidents, and of course young students who were provided the energy of the movement, but also provided a very radical and explosive ingredient to the mix in the party. The one principle within the party about which she was very clear right from the beginning was non-violence, inspired by Gandhi, because of course she had spent 5 years in her teenage years in Burma when her mother was the Burmese ambassador there. Sorry, in India, in Delhi. And she had come under the spell of Gandhi as a young woman. And non-violence was at the heart of her party. Arguably, it was the only real principle that the party had. But she did succeed in persuading the party to stick to non-violence, and which was in itself an achievement, considering the fact that within the democratic uprising there was a lot of violence. There were some appalling atrocities carried out by the students. There were decapitations of soldiers and policemen and various things like that. Once she was in charge, she imposed the non-violent rule very strictly and very successfully. But otherwise, it's not clear how she saw things developing. During 1989, the meetings got bigger and bigger. The membership rolls of the party grew ever larger. She was carrying all before it, and the regime was kind of looking on in consternation. But it's not clear how she imagined things would go. Did she think that the regime would simply pack up and go away, would simply get into a helicopter and leave town? Instead, it was clear that in fact it was heading for a smash. And in a way, she provoked that smash in the middle of 1989, when she chose to attack General Ne Win in person. She had issued veiled attacks against the army and its role before, ever since her first speech, but she'd never actually attacked him by name. And she must have been aware that this was an initiative fraught with peril, because he was not only the man in charge, number one, as he was known, but he was also an extremely volatile figure, given to terrible fits of temper. All around him were in terror of the guy. She gave a speech in which she said, "General Ne Win is still widely believed to control Burma behind the scenes, and he was responsible, fashioning the military into a body answerable only to him. The opinion of all our people is that U Ne Win is still creating all the problems in this country. He, quote, caused the nation to suffer for 26 years and lowered the prestige of the armed forces." As I wrote in the next paragraph, this was a breathtaking assault, the distillation of a lifetime of antipathy. Whether she realized the consequences or not, within just a few weeks, she was locked up in her home and would remain there for the next 5 days. The election, which all this was leading to, was carried out. Her party won, but nothing changed. Because of that sentence of house arrest in July 1989, Sue disappeared from view, and so she became famous and invisible at the same time. And as a result of that, we were curious to know more about her in the West, but there was very little to be said. And as a result of that, she emerged as a rather two-dimensional black and white figure, as seen by people in Burma as a bodhisattva, a living Buddha, and in the West as a sort of political saint. When I started doing the research for this book, I felt that the challenge was to find the human complexity behind this very two-dimensional figure of a political saint. And I found it, because as a human being, the complexity is there. One of the reasons we can think of her as a saint is because of her very clear morality, her firm moral standards, of which the adherence to non-violence is one aspect. And this is true. This is a true aspect about her which comes from her equally morally fierce and severe mother. And it emerged when she went to Oxford in 1964 to study at the university. She went to study politics, philosophy and economics. And she made friends in Oxford with a fellow student at St. Hugh's called Anne Pasternak Slater, who has written a delightful memoir, a very insightful memoir into their friendship. She said about Sue, she was an original who was at once laughably naive and genuinely innocent. All my memories of her at that time have certain recurring elements: cleanliness, determination, curiosity, a fierce purity. How do I see her? Eyebrows furrowed under a heavy fringe, shocked incredulity and disapproval, saying, "But Anne!" Everyone was on the hunt for boyfriends. Many wanted affairs, sex being still a half-forbidden, half-won desideratum. Being laid back about being laid was de rigueur. It was extremely difficult to preserve any kind of innocence in such a setting. To most of our English contemporaries, Sue's startled disapproval seemed a comic aberration. One bold girl asked her, "But don't you want to sleep with someone?" Back came the indignant reply, "No, I'll never go to bed with anyone except my husband. Now I just go to bed hugging my pillow." It raised a storm of mostly derisive laughter. So the image we have of Sue as a very moral person is well-founded, according to Anne. But this did not mean that she was a square person, that she was hidebound or unimaginative. One of the pictures I was happiest to put in the book shows Sue at the age of about 15 or 16 in Delhi, taking part in a play she wrote, which was a spoof of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. And she's playing the part of Cleopatra. She was often quite theatrical. She loved performing and she loved writing. Her first ambition was to be a writer. While she was at home in Delhi, she was very much under the thumb of her mother, who made sure that she was raised like a proper old-fashioned lady. She was always doing either piano or embroidery or horse riding or something of the sort. But once she got to England, then those restrictions fell away and she started to find herself. We see it in the way that she got rid of her ponytail and grew the fringe, which has been her trademark look ever since. She arrived in England in the 60s, which, as you know, was the most exciting moment of sort of cultural vitality. And many of the aspects, such as sexual liberation, had no appeal to her, but some of them did. For example, she really liked the Moulton bicycle, which was very trendy in London at the time, with the small wheels. And because you could not really ride a Moulton bicycle wearing a sarong, she bought white jeans and she started riding around in that. And she returned to Rangoon one summer after she'd started living in England, and her old friends in Rangoon were astonished and by the transformation. The ugly duckling has turned into a swan, one of them said. While at university, she also fell in love for the first time, and it was quite a serious affair with a Pakistani student who later went on to become a senior Pakistani diplomat called Tariq Haider. I contacted Mr. Haider, who is a frequent commentator in the Pakistani newspapers, in the hope that he might shed some light on this affair, but he wasn't interested in commenting. The affair continued after she graduated, and then came to an end. What's interesting to me about the affair is not to know any details about it, which would be tittle-tattle, but simply the fact that she seriously entertained the idea of sharing her life with somebody from a different culture, a different religion, a different part of the world. In other words, she was already seeing herself as her own person. It's hard to imagine a relationship that would have been more unsatisfactory from the point of view of her mother. And after the end of that relationship, she fell in love with Michael Aris, and that was hardly any better from the Burmese perspective, because, of course, Britain was the imperial tyrant. It was going to bed with the enemy, and no mistake. When a Burmese lady proposes to get married, she needs to get the approval of her own family, and she's also supposed to write to the bridegroom's family to get their assent as well. And she wrote to Michael's twin brother, Anthony Aris, to ask for his approval of her marriage to Michael. And she had to confess that she hadn't yet got approval from her own mother and brother. And she wrote to him confessing this, but in very light-hearted terms. She wrote, "I'm sure my mother and brother will get over their initial disappointment at what they probably consider my usual waywardness." Now, I came across this letter, which Anthony Aris very kindly let me see, and I was struck by it, and particularly by the word waywardness, because, again, this is not a word that fits in with our very stereotyped image of Sue as somebody who is at all wayward. But in fact, if you look at her career up into the mid-20s, there are elements of eccentricity, of somebody groping their way and trying to find their own path. She took the course in PP&E at Oxford because her mother insisted on it and because it was a respectable course for a young lady to take. But she didn't like it, and she twice tried to change. She tried to change to English, which would have been a good idea. She was a very good writer. They wouldn't let her. Then she tried to change to forestry, for which I've had no convincing explanation. She got a degree, but it was a third, which is a very poor degree, and by no means a sign that she's not intelligent, but a sign that she wasn't really engaged in it. Then you might expect that a lady with her name and with her degree and everything else would then fly back to Rangoon and find a suitable Burmese boy from the political class and settle down. Instead, after a few months doing nothing in particular in London, she flew to New York, where she enrolled in a course at the New York University in international affairs, and then dropped out after about 3 months. And one of her friends has said it was because the journey to the university by bus was dangerous, which is an explanation I don't really buy, because Suu Kyi has not been deterred from any course of action by danger. Clearly something about it didn't work for her, and it's hard to know what. Possibly because the head of the studies, who was called Frank Trager, I think, had close connections with Ne Win and other senior members of the regime, and she may have picked up alarm signals from that. But anyway, she dropped out. Her friend, who was called Ma Than E, and was a famous singer in Burma before the war, was working at the UN, where, of course, U Thant was at the time the Secretary General. And she got a job, a rather humble job, at the United Nations, where she worked for more than 2 years. So this is just I'm just sort of trying to suggest that there are depths and aspects to her character which are not really accounted for in the common vision of Sue as this saintly figure. What is true, however, is that she's a very strong person, and with an incredibly strong will. And again, this is something that emerges in the early years. When she entered Burmese politics, she was not merely imitating her father. As we see from these early years, she was a seeker, a trier, a person with enough willpower, determination and self-confidence to wander off any beaten track, to drop things and turn around, to trample on Burmese taboos about marrying foreigners, for example. From her university years onwards, she was very much her own person. And those attributes remain her most important characteristics even today. What is remarkable about what's happened since November 2010, when she came out of detention, is the way that she has once again become the central figure in Burma, even though many people wrote her off years ago. And I think that the way we account for this is the fact, part of the reason we account for this is the fact that she's not really a political figure. Although politics has been her life for more than 20 years now, she has made no concessions to politics with a small p, to the horse trading, backdoor dealing, arts and crafts of politics. Whether she is talking to Hillary Clinton or talking to 100,000 Burmese people in a stadium in Mandalay, what shines out is her sincerity. And her people know that what they see is what they get. And the reason they know that without any shadow of a doubt is because she had suffered too much in all these years to be other than completely serious about what she's doing. There's been a biopic about her life. I don't know if anybody's seen it, called The Lady. Has that been seen in the US? Anybody seen it? No. It's filmed by a French director called Luc Besson. And unfortunately, it's not a masterpiece. But it has a brilliant performance by the Chinese actor Michelle Yeoh in the lead role. And I think it's a very valuable film because of Michelle's performance, and in particular because in the performance she nails one particular lie about Sue's career, which is a very pernicious lie, and which Sue herself has been unable to nail for particular reasons. And that is that when she decided to follow politics rather than staying with her family, the choice was an easy one. You meet people, I meet a number of people who are rather hostile to Sue because they say she was a cold mother. She had these two sons and she renounced her maternal duties. She shrugged them off in order to follow the path of political glory. What's clear from the film, and is clear also from her life, is that in fact it was a cause of immense anguish, this choice which she faced. And she was unable to explain the anguish in public because the regime was deliberately using her maternal feelings as a way to try and drive her out of Burma and back to Britain. That was always the strategy. After she was put under house arrest, Michael and the boys went back to Oxford. The boys were immediately stripped of their Burmese passports, and all three of them were forbidden visas. So in other words, it was impossible for them to get together again. It was not possible for Sue to say to herself, well, here I am, I'm stuck here, but at least we can get together 1 year down the road, 2 years down the road. At least we have that. They offered her no hope whatsoever. And in fact, in the space of 12 years, the number of meetings that she had with anybody in her family can be counted on the fingers of one hand. So this is a deliberate policy by the by the regime to try and get rid of her. And because she realized that this was their policy, she could not say in any interviews in public what she was feeling about it, because to say, I am in anguish about this, they are burning me up with this policy, would be to show that they were winning. It would be to give heart to the regime in their attempt to get rid of her. So this explains to me, this is adequate and total explanation of why she came across as so cold. Whereas in the film, if you get a chance to see it, you will see this very dramatic and very convincing enactment of what it actually cost Sue in emotional terms to lose her family. And in undergoing that sort of pain, she was forging a sort of solidarity with the thousands and thousands of Burmese who were also locked up in far worse conditions, of course, than she was, for years and years, often with ludicrously long sentences for doing very trivial acts of democratic participation. She dealt with her pain in the same way that the millions of Burmese brutalized by the regime dealt with the pain they suffered, by cultivating mental toughness and by becoming very close to the religious practice, which is very important in Burma. She learned how to meditate during her first period of house arrest, and it became a very important strengthener for her throughout the following years. And I think, to me, it is this forging of solidarity with her people through the meditation practice, by cultivating mental toughness, that she established this extraordinary bond with her people. As somebody who had been outside her country for so long, she saw it with the sort of clarity that returning expatriates often uniquely have. And in the months before she was locked up, she wrote, "It's not power that corrupts, but fear. Fear of losing power corrupts those who wield it, and the fear of the scourge of power corrupts those who are subject to it." Fear, which is in Burmese is baya, quote, "destroys all sense of right and wrong," she went on, "which is why it is at the root of corruption." With so close a relationship between fear and corruption, it is little wonder that in any society where fear is rife, corruption in all forms becomes deeply entrenched. It was not only economic distress that ignited the revolt of 1988, she went on, but the disgust of young people at the way their lives were poisoned and deformed by fear. In Burma, the only relationship to authority that was permitted was one of complete passivity, where the people were no more self-assertive than, quote, "water in cupped hands" of the rulers. Law and order, a relatively neutral phrase in English, translates into Burmese as Nyen Wut Pi Pya, literally silent, crouched, crushed, flattened. That was the attitude which the regime required of the Burmese, and that was what they rose up against. The insurrectionists proposed a different model. "Emerald cool we may be as water in cupped hands," Sue wrote, "but oh that we might be as splinters of glass in cupped hands." Glass splinters, Sue wrote, the smallest, with its sharp, glinting power to defend itself against hands that try to crush, could be seen as a vivid symbol of the spark of courage that is an essential attribute of those who would free themselves from the grip of oppression. So that's what she gained. That was the tough wisdom that she gained during all those years of isolation. Today, Burma stands at an important juncture. There are authoritative voices who will say that sanctions could have been lifted years ago and democratic reforms would have started as money began to course through the economy. They say that it is Suu and her vast international fan base which have condemned Burma to years of stagnation. Yet the outside world, from Hillary Clinton to Britain's William Hague, and perhaps even including the rulers of China, recognise the special nature of Suu's contribution to the debate, her centrality to the nation's future. The leaders of the mass Burmese revolts of 1988 and 2007, who were recently released from jail, recognise it too. It's not merely the name and the beauty, and it's not just the fact that she refused to shut up or go away. It's because she has demonstrated in her own life the moral qualities which she believes essential to the healthy development of her nation. She has, in other words, manifested the most important quality of true leadership. If her sad and much abused nation now has the possibility of redemption, that is very much her doing. We can also see in the developments over the past 9 months or so a great maturing in her political skills since 1989. In 1989, as I read in the passage earlier, she went into a direct and disastrous confrontation with Ne Win, in which she insulted him publicly and blamed him for all the problems in the country. This time round, she has been much more circumspect and much more careful and diplomatic in the way she has dealt with the regime. And she now has good relations with President Thein Sein and is happy to pay him compliments in the press, calling him a good listener and a person who is not corrupt. And they seem to have created some kind of an alliance. Of course, the real hard work starts here. I was in New York a couple of weeks ago at the Women in the World Summit, and I heard Hillary Clinton make a speech during which she talked about Suu Kyi, who of course she met in Burma in January. And she made what I think is an extremely important point. She said that Suu has been crisscrossing the country, absorbing the hopes that the people are putting on her. But if she enters government, she will cross that crucial line from being an adored icon to being a power holder. Clinton said, "I know that route," adding that she also knew how hard it is to balance one's ideals and aspirations with the demands of practical politics. It's not impossible that Suu Kyi will be offered a cabinet post once she is in Parliament. Some people think that this would be a way to surrender to the regime, to become a pawn in their game, a hostage of the regime, and would spell the end of her influence. I'm not sure. I think it's many people have underestimated her down the years, and they're underestimating her again now. But certainly, if she ever gets power in her hands, which is what she wants, she will find herself in a very different position with regard to the Burmese people than she is at the moment. And if she has faced tough decisions before, this could be the toughest of all. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that. Let me just throw out 2 questions before we open it up to the audience. The first one is that, as you've discussed at length, Aung San Suu Kyi is undoubtedly a celebrity. She's world famous. T-shirts are printed with her image on it. There's, as you said, there's been a film produced about her. Now that she, however, could well take office for the first time, how would you say that her celebrity status could affect how she would be perceived as a public servant, and how would it affect her ability to be a public servant? That's the first question. The second one is simpler. If you could just talk a bit about the title of the book, The Lady and the Peacock, and about this peacock effect that you discuss at times through the book.
Let me take the second one first. The reason I called the book The Lady and the Peacock is because the peacock is the symbol of the NLD, Suu Kyi's party. And in fact, during the last election in 2010, the peacock was banned as an election symbol. This time around, they have adopted. You can see a miniature of the NLD flag here with the peacock and the star. It was a symbol of the royal family. Then after the British takeover of Burma, it became a symbol of revolt against the colonial authorities, and subsequently became the symbol of her party. The peacock effect, which is my own phrase, refers to what I find is a fascinating line of influence from the non-violence of Suu Kyi and her party into the non-violence which we have seen in the colour revolutions in Eastern Europe, and also to some extent, although sadly to a limited extent, in the Arab Spring as well. And there is actually if this is not the connection would seem to be fanciful, because we're talking about very scattered parts of the world, but it's not, because after the suppression of the Burmese in July 1989, and after the NLD MPs were basically chased into exile after 1990, there was sort of gathering of democratic forces on the Thai-Burmese border at a place called Manipur, which I actually visited soon afterwards. And there was this was basically the jungle camp run by the Karen National Liberation Army, which had been fighting the Burmese for autonomy or independence practically ever since 1949. But arrived at this place a guy called Robert Helvey, who had been the US Defense Attaché in Burma in the early 1980s, and had fallen under the sway of an extraordinary American academic called Gene Sharp, who is known still around, and he is the father of political defiance, non-violent political revolutionary theory. And his books include The Politics of Nonviolent Action and Gandhi as a Political Strategist. And Helvey set up some workshops in Manipur with the Burmese expats, trying to teach them the principles and the practice of nonviolent political resistance. Inspired by the example of Suu Kyi, but also finding fault with her lack of strategy, with the fact that she had gone for a head-on confrontation with General Ne Win and the military regime, which she was bound to lose. So Helvey and Sharp have devoted years of effort and study into finding ways in which you can confront a tyrannical authority with non-violent means, rigorously non-violent means, without either being killed or imprisoned, and with the possibility of winning. So there is that, as I say, there is a direct and I find a fascinating link between non-violence in Burma and the rest of the world. With regard to Sue as a celebrity becoming an active political figure, a power-wielding figure, I'm afraid we're in the realm of speculation. I find it impossible to imagine that Sue would be named, for example, Minister of Education in the regime, which was a job she would love to do, and then she would disappear into the apparatus of power in Naypyidaw and never be seen again. This doesn't make sense to me, and I'm sure it won't happen. Somehow she will continue to make use of the fact that she has got the best address book of anybody in Asia. She can call anybody in the world and they'll listen to her. And at the same time, she has the support of, one would say, without much risk of contradiction, the overwhelming majority of her people. And whatever happens next, she is not going to allow the regime to forget these two attributes.
Okay, let's open up to all of you. We'll have microphones on each side of the room, so please wait until you receive the microphone to ask your question, and if you could give your name and affiliation, that would be great. So start right down here.
My name is Betsy Clark, and I'm with the Women's National Democratic Club, but I myself met with Suu Kyi when I was in the State Department heading up the Democracy and Human Rights Fund in the State Department, and went out to Burma and met with her. And I did think she was a very breathtaking person, and your description of great strength is right on. I would just like to ask you whether you think you could describe this period that we're in right now and as a transition to democracy, and if so, if you could comment a little on two political factors, the attitude of China and also the very sharp ethnic divisions within Burma. I mean, is she set to be able to overcome all of those?
I think that this is certainly the most interesting political moment in Burma since 1962, and it is a transition to democracy, but it's not an easy one, and it's not an uncontested one. There are still extremely powerful, corrupt and wealthy forces holding power, which are going to fight tooth and nail to prevent any kind of a thoroughgoing democratization of Burma. And I think Suu Kyi is extremely well aware that there is a long, hard struggle ahead. Nonetheless, one cannot underestimate what has happened so far. I mean, for example, I met a friend who is a former political prisoner the other day, who'd just come back. He'd been given a visa for the first time in 15 years, and he confirmed that all of his friends who were political prisoners are now free. So, I mean, there are still some people in jail for complicated reasons, but all of the prominent and practically all of the significant political prisoners are outside. So this regime has really accomplished things. The question of China is a really interesting one. My own feeling is that it is the sanctions of the West forced Burma into a closer relationship with China than was comfortable. China's relationship with Burma, like its relationship with many other countries in Southeast Asia, is too close for comfort. It is too big and too imperious, and one of the principal reasons why Thein Sein embarked on his present course is to try and get some space between Burma and China, and he very adroitly and intelligently saw that Suu Kyi was the best and arguably the only way in which he could actually reach out to the rest of the world and say, hello, we want to do something different. China itself is looking on and saying nothing in particular. Suu Kyi actually had a meeting with the Chinese ambassador to Rangoon some months back at her own request, which was the first contact, and I'm sure it was extremely polite and nothing of any substance was said on either side. But the way that develops will be very interesting to watch. Particularly, I mean, Burma has always been a prize contested between China and Japan. So again, that's something which we'll watch play out in the coming months with interest. The ethnic question is also an extremely important one. One of the most important things that Aung San did in 1947 was an agreement called the Panglong Agreement, in which all of the ethnic minorities in Burma, except, unfortunately, for the Karen, agreed on a federal structure for the country in which there would be quite a degree of self-government for the ethnic minorities. This was never put into effect. Instead, the Burman majority have tried to impose their rule on the other ethnic minorities, with the result of war, continual war along the borders. Suu Kyi has made it clear that she wants another Panglong conference, another attempt to reach a similar kind of deal, which one would say is really the only viable way forward. Thein Sein, the president, has made steps in this direction. We've seen for the first time an official ceasefire with the Karen, who've been fighting since 1949. We've seen a ceasefire with the Shan. There is still a very nasty war going on with the Kachin in the far north. So it's patchy and it's difficult because you've got all sorts of complicated relationships between the army and the drug dealers and the Chinese and the Thais. So this is probably the biggest political challenge of the lot. But nobody doubts that if you want a peaceful Burma, then that's the challenge you have to crack. Thanks.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah, let's go down here, standing in the front.
Thank you so much. I really like your presentation. Thank you. It's really, it gives me a lot of insight about the life of this great lady. My name is Burtukam Yedex. I'm sorry, I'm an Ethiopian, and I'm a democracy fellow at National Endowment for Democracy. One of women who tried to follow the footsteps of Aung San Suu Kyi. I was the first woman political leader in my country. I even followed her life in a very tragic way. She was in.
Sorry to interrupt. What country are you from?
Ethiopia.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right.
I was repeatedly incarcerated because of my political orientation. I was even put in solitary confinement, and I shared similar experiences, the anguish, and I'm a single mother. You know, I was put in solitary confinement, leaving my kid behind. But you know, her life was giving me hope in many ways, and you know, I feel like her life has a very significant, a huge significance to my career. I just want to ask you a couple of questions. I have a difficulty in taking your conclusion with regards to the initial smash against her party was kind of invoked by her actions. I couldn't imagine, her party was already posing a huge threat to the military junta, whether she confronted in that manner or not. I don't think she could have avoided that kind of smashed target against her party. My second question: do you think Aung San Suu Kyi would have all capabilities and abilities to tackle with practical politics, here after this time? Actually, you have commented a lot about it, but I would like to clarify it a bit more, and I would like to know the current position of the political party with regards to ideology and what is getting people connected. Still, is it her figure, or or only the non-violence as you described, or whether they have already have a clear vision about the future of the country? Thank you so much.
Well, taking your last point first, it's. I think that her figure is the overwhelmingly dominant attraction of the NLD4 people. Because, of course, nothing has really changed for ordinary people. The problem is that nothing has changed in Burma. Everything has changed. So much has changed politically, as we were just discussing, in terms of people coming out of jail and ceasefires and so on. But economically, Burma remains completely stagnant, in a huge unemployment. I mean, so. And the NLD, because it has no power, cannot do anything except say things will be better if we're in charge. And still there is no kind of... I mean, we can't say that this is a party which has an ideological kind of coherence about it. It's her party. So the transfer from that, both for her and for her party, the transfer from being icons, from being kind of symbols of hope, to actually being practical wielders of power, is going to be enormously difficult for all of them. And whether her party is up to it is another matter, because for the best part of 20 years, the regime did everything in its power to break the party by putting everybody in jail and by making clear to anybody who wanted to join the party that they would be ruining their career prospects and their life prospects. So it remains, for me, I mean, I've spent a certain amount of time with NLD people and in their office and so on, but it's hard to gauge what sort of vitality there is there, what kind of intellectual, human resources there are in the party. I don't know. One hopes for the best. But there is... the Burmese political scene has a great capacity for shattering into tiny factions. And one hopes that won't happen. But all this remains to be seen.
Hey, right in the front. Bob.
Bob Hathaway here at the center. Thanks, Peter, for a really very interesting and informative presentation. I've read good part of the book, and I not only commend it to others, but encourage everyone here to purchase a copy. I was going to ask you a question that you began to deal with in your last answer. So I'm going to put it back on the table, but I expect your answer is going to be, I don't have anything more specifically to say, so I'm going to ask you the second question. I was originally going to ask you, has the party or has Suu Kyi given any sort of hints about an economic program? And my guess is very few hints, but I would invite you to tell me I'm wrong in that respect. The other question I would ask is,
My fault, did we say 12 or 12:30?
she's been isolated more or less for the better part of
okay?
20
Sorry.
plus
Yeah,
years.
Okay.
presumably that will disappear in a minute. But her country, and therefore her party members, have also been largely out of the global mainstream. What can you tell us about the prevalence of social media, or of these new forms of not simply communication but political mobilization? To what extent has that reached Burma? To what extent does the NLD use it as a tool? To what extent does the regime view it as either a threat or an opportunity?
Thanks very much, Bob. According, the economic program, in fact, one just has to bear in mind that the economic situation in Burma is both highly peculiar and extremely undeveloped. It's peculiar in the sense that you've got two different exchange rates. So you have something like 6 chats to the dollar is the official exchange rate, and something like 850 chats to the dollar is the exchange rate on the street. And the only reason that the country is not completely bankrupt is because the regime uses whichever of these two exchange rates is more convenient for any particular transaction. You have to take all your cash when you go to Burma because there are no ATMs. The place has been so cut off from the international mainstream for such a long time that all Suu Kyi really has to say is we want to have a bit of normality around here, and obviously the first step once these elections have gone smoothly and we see the reforms are on track is for the World Bank and the IMF to come in and start sort of stitching the country back into the world's fabric again, and I'm sure that's going to happen within the next year. The social media thing, despite the fact that this has been such a peculiar, isolated country, the internet has been very important in Burma, as in other countries in a situation of tyranny and revolt. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily a crucial or the single most important influence, but it has been a big influence. In Rangoon, if you want to, the internet is the government has always tried to block the internet. In 2007 was the big moment when you had this what we call the Saffron Revolution, which was the first time that a revolt had actually got out from Burma to the outside world in real time, because of the incredibly brave Burmese video journalists who managed to get their stuff out to Thailand through the internet, despite every effort by the regime to stop them. And then it was beamed back into Burma on CNN. I was actually in Burma at the time. I was in a little place in the far south called Kotong, where there was an outdoor cafe with 2 large TV screens, one of which was showing a Japanese samurai drama, and the other one had the CNN news with the hundreds of thousands of Burmese monks marching through the centre of Rangoon, and the clientele in the cafe were just kind of watching like this, completely lost for words. Rangoon itself has got an incredible number of internet cafes, most of them tiny little places squirreled away up numerous flights of stairs in seedy little places in the middle of town, full of spies, I'm sure. I always made sure I used a different internet cafe every time. But you see full of young Burmese talking to their families, working in Thailand on Skype, using Twitter and Facebook and all the things that we're accustomed to. And so, in a way, as I say, as in common with other countries in similar situations, this has been a very important means in breaking down the isolation which the regime would quite happily have maintained right up to the present day.
Okay, let's start in the back, gentleman with the blue sweater.
Thank you. Mahfouz Tadros. I used to work on Burma. I used to work for the World Bank, and I visited Burma many times for 4 years between 81 and 85. So I know a little bit about Burma, but my question, and the economic situation, this 6 chat per dollar has been there since the 80s, by the way. And to be 800, I mean, the World Bank and IMF in particular, when it comes to the exchange rate, they will have a job and have to do to fix this thing.
Undoubtedly.
But my question, I was interested in your comparison between what happened in Burma and what happened in the Arab Spring. I mean, in particular in Egypt, the revolution in Egypt did not have a leader, but in Burma, at least she is a symbolic leader for the revolution. Could you elaborate a little bit about the similarity? I mean, the social media in Egypt played a great part in the revolution, and the youth, really are the ones who put the revolution in the streets and Tahrir Square. Where are the similarities between these? Thank you.
Well, in a way, the revolt in '88 is closer to the Arab Spring than what's happened in Burma recently. I think Thein Sein's initiative in August last year, when he invited Suu Kyi to meet him, and this whole process of reform got underway, was certainly partially a reaction to the Arab Spring. The Burmese regime have always looked abroad with anxiety about possible things that might affect their power. So one of the reasons they moved the capital to Naypyidaw was because they were worried that after after getting rid of Saddam, the US might come after them. And I think Thein Sein was worried, and maybe with some reason, that there would be a copycat uprising in Burma following what happened in Tahrir Square and across the Arab world. I mean, some Burmese say, well, what's happening is not real in Burma because you cannot give people democracy on a plate. They have to struggle for it. Don't know, but certainly it is helpful to Burma to have a figure like Suu, who is like an embodiment of where they want to go and has very clear ideas herself of the means to do so. Perhaps the Buddhist background is helpful as well, because it does tend to reinforce the non-violent message of the party, as killing is such a the number one taboo in Buddhism. But so as I say, I think there are parallels between the two, but the point about what's happening in Burma now is that it happened after the Arab Spring. Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the question in the front over here.
Thanks very much. My name is Dan Bob. I'm with Sasakawa Peace Foundation, USA. I had a chance to visit with Aung San Suu Kyi in 1999 when she was under house arrest, spent a couple hours with her. And I have to say your characterization of her personality, even though it was only a couple hours, is pretty much dead on.
That's quite a long time.
Yeah, yeah. My question is, this is rather simplistic, but in a sense, she is very much in control of U.S. policy toward Burma. I guess as an example of this was the call that the president made to her before announcing that Secretary Clinton would visit, in effect asking for her permission. I'm wondering whether there are any other countries that sort of would defer to her as extensively as the U.S. does on its policies. A lot of this goes back to some of her relationships with members on Capitol Hill, where I was working at the time I met her. But U.S. has extensive sanctions, which would be very difficult to remove even under the best of circumstances for a variety of reasons. But I'm just wondering, is there any other country where she can exert comparable influence over their policies toward Burma?
Well, I mean, I think certainly that the position of Britain is comparable. I don't know whether. I mean, to be honest, I rather doubt that President Obama was actually asking her permission to send Secretary Clinton to Burma. I mean, but certainly her influence is I think we're talking about degrees of influence, and her influence on U.S. policy and on British policy is very, very strong. Her influence on German diplomatic policy is less strong, and Germany, of course, has an important voice within Europe, and so on. So, I mean, I think there are a few places where she and what she thinks are not a factor, but I'm not really sufficiently deep inside the diplomatic loop to give you a very precise answer.
Okay, we've got time for two final questions, so we're going to take them consecutively. So first the gentleman there, the blue shirt, and then right down here, and the man in the second row.
Thank you very much. I'm Sin Shui. I'm from Burma. I've been a former political prisoner, and I was a long-time activist from Burma too. And right now I'm studying political science for my MA program. And I would like to say thank you very much that you gave a very unique information regarding the Aung San Suu Kyi background, and I appreciate that. And I would like to talk about the political space that the new Utain Sen region government created the political space for the Aung San Suu Kyi. I accept that the Aung San Suu Kyi took that opportunity to get in the parliament and to take the political opportunity. At the same time, that she need to rebuild the political party in Burma too, that we have been systematically demolished a long time. So my question is that this is the uphill political battle that I see. So how long in Burma that would take the civilian control in the democratization government? How long would it take, like 3 times or 4 times or 20 years, or how long do you think that the civilians or politicians would control in Burma? And another question is that after the election, that if the president offered Aung San Suu Kyi for the foreign minister position, do you think that she would take that opportunity, or she rather take other opposition to solve the internal problems? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And let's hear your question as well.
Yeah, yes, please. I'm Senior Colonel Saranyu, Defense and Military Attaché from the Royal Thai Embassy. Unlike many audience here who had a chance to meet with Suu Kyi, I escorted the Thai Army Chief, and twice I had a chance to meet with Tan Chuai, Mong A, Durashoiman, and also Deng Seng. And I'm also a good friend of the Defense Attaché from Myanmar here. I'm sure Suu Kyi is working very hard within Myanmar, but I wonder how many, who are her friends outside. Perhaps Myanmar people living in the U.S. or other countries would be of some influence to help her. Or I wonder what your view on Thailand. Is Thailand helping Suu Kyi, or staying neutral, or perhaps on the other side? Thank you.
Yeah, let me answer your question first. Your first question: how long will it take? I mean, I think it's Suu Kyi has made it very clear that her goal is not simply to become an MP, but it is to change the constitution, and in particular to change the rule in which 25% of parliamentary seats are taken without election by members of the army, and also to change the fact that the supreme power in the country remains a military council, which in effect is a successor to the military council, SLORC and SPDC, which have ruled the country since 1989. So how long it will take, I don't know, but I think as there is some momentum in the reform process at the moment. The thing is moving forward. And so you feel that it really needs to happen sometime between now and 2015, when the next general election is held. One feels that this is with Thein Sein, who is not particularly healthy. He has a pacemaker, but he's clearly in charge. While he's around and still firmly in power, then this is the moment to drive home the advantage. So I think we're in for a very interesting 2 or 3 years. And if things go very well, then we may see some Thein Sein himself because the trouble is, to get constitutional change, you need to have an enormous majority of within the parliament, and so you'd need Thein Sein's endorsement. You need the USDP's endorsement, which is unimaginable. How can they change the constitution? And yet one feels so many unimaginable things have happened in the last 9 months. Maybe this could happen too. So that's the to me that's the key structural reform that has to be undertaken. About if she was offered foreign minister, would she take it? I mean, the thing is that she's nearly 67 years old. I mean, she's been hanging about for 20 years. She wants to improve her country. She wants to leave a legacy of actual improvement, not merely to be famous and loved, etc. So, I mean, friends of mine say, that it would be a disaster for her to take a job in the government, but I think that she would do everything she could to make it possible for her to take a job, so she could actually do something. But as I said in the last words of my talk, that will be the biggest challenge she's faced yet, to do that. I'm afraid I can't say anything very interesting in answer to your question, because obviously Thailand is both a role model, in some ways a role model for Burma, in some ways a dire warning, and the closest and enormously successful neighbour, and in many ways, Burma is going to develop in ways that it will become to resemble Thailand, I'm sure. But I hope that they can strike up a very good partnership.
Well, thank you. This has all been quite interesting. I think you should really appreciate what he's said and go outside and pick up a book on your way out. So please join me in a round of applause for Peter Popham.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.